right, welcome to another episode of the Liberator podcast. My name is Russell Hunter. This is James Silberman and Sam Riley. This is episode number 89 of the Liberator podcast. Thanks for tuning in. And today we're going to be doing something that is pretty common out there in podcast land, and that is watch a clip from somebody else's podcast and respond to it. And the focus will be Matt Walsh, who he probably gets a lot of contacts. You're like, whoa, are you Sam Riley?
All the time, I'm sure, yeah.
Actually, it's the other way around.
Yes.
You get messages from people who say,
you look like Matt Walsh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's a good-looking guy.
Sure.
Sure. You can't say no. But Matt Walsh recently has made some statements about incrementalism, maybe a few weeks ago.
Yeah, a few weeks ago. And then more recently, he kind of challenged people to give him something to rebut on his podcast. So he enjoys doing these rebuttals where he goes back and forth. Recently, he was dealing with some rather unreasonable progressives.
Well, actually, they weren't progressives. They were like, they were like snotty libertarians with like progressive morals.
Were they?
But like brutally, they probably had a platform smaller than ours, but he's like, I'm going to deal with these things. And he just like decimated them. And I generally agreed with him and I thought it was really funny.
Yeah.
But in the midst of responding to these libertarians who were just heckling him, he did say, what'd he say? He said,
he said, these people are basically almost too dumb for me to give a response to. So you guys give me a challenge. Actually, if you disagree with me about something, make a video and actually challenge me to think about something and defend my view. And that's what we're hoping to do.
Yeah. So we're not big anti Matt Walsh people. I guess we didn't even see this happen, but somebody else saw it and said, hey, Matt Walsh wants to respond to reasonable people who disagree with him. You guys are reasonable people, and you disagree with him. Mm-hmm. And so they sent us a clip where he espouses incrementalism and sort of like strawmans abolitionism, immediatism, and so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've actually met Matt Walsh before at a pro-life gala.
Was that confusing for people?
Yeah, it was.
Like they thought it was like Matt Walsh and his stunt double?
That's right. I didn't have glasses at that point, and my beard was not full. So,
yeah. Well, you guys do fill out the beard nicely. I don't think you should be insulted.
Thanks.
He's got a big, manly beard, and so do you.
All right.
Sam doesn't know what to do with these Matt Walsh.
For some reason, you don't seem to like it, but I mean, I just roll with it. So
okay. Yeah.
So what we're gonna do, format wise, and hopefully, we've got some new listeners or watchers. So we are the Liberator podcast. Our platform is we're with Free the States, which is a state sovereignty organization that advocates total and immediate abolition of abortion. So strategically, rhetorically, ideologically, everything, we advocate treating abortion as murder in bills and practice and seeking its utter, total, immediate end. And Matt Walsh, kind of in the video that we're going to play to begin with, and we're just going to play it straight through. This is the entirety of his remarks in favor of incrementalism over abolitionism. He doesn't call it abolitionism. We'll get into that later. But I think to begin with, we're going to play his clip fully.
And then we'll go piece by piece after that.
Yep.
You look at the language in this law and the fact that, you can still get the abortion of the Down syndrome child as long as a doctor will say that it's not because of the Down syndrome. So in effect, it means that it's not really going to stop anybody from getting the abortion, because you can any woman can just go to a doctor and say, I want an abortion for any other reason, just whatever, but for financial reasons, anything. And the doctor will just sign the letter and that's it. And they can still get the abortion. So it's probably not going to stop any, it's hard to see how it'll actually prevent any of these murders from happening. And also, we know that these bans on abortions, again, should be much broader than it should protect Down syndrome kids, but also all kids. Still, I'm of the opinion that do anything you can do, any laws at all that you can pass, restricting abortion to any extent whatsoever, you should pass them. That's kind of where I fall on this. There's always this debate about incrementalism versus an all or nothing philosophy. And I just don't see how you can side with anything other than the incremental approach for now, as long as you're not satisfied with that. So you pass this bill. This is the bill you can get passed right now. Keep fighting for the next. Keep fighting to get the next bill out there. As long as you're not satisfied. Now, where I would oppose bills like this that, if they improve the situation, they only improve it in a very minor way. I'd only oppose it if it means that this is all you're going to do, and now you're going to rest on your laurels and say that, well, we did it. We did all we could do. As long as the fight keeps going. But whatever you can pass it. Whatever you can do right now. Whatever can happen right now to protect as many kids as possible, do it. And then tomorrow, do something else. And from a political perspective, it also puts Democrats in the position of, you're on the hook now. Okay, ball's in your court. Are you actually going to take the position that it should be explicitly legal to kill Down syndrome babies because they have Down syndrome? As we know, many Democrats have no problem saying, I think that should be legal. But a bill that forces them to come out and say it is good also for that reason. Force them to take the mask off. That's another good thing about some of these abortion bills. Even if some of these bills, the number of abortions that they're actually going to stop is somewhat minimal. If they force Democrats to take the mask off and show their monstrous face, then that is also another benefit.
All right. So that's a pretty standard position. I'd say that is the standard pro-life position that he's arguing for there. And he's setting it up sort of like incrementalism versus what we would call abolitionism. Yeah. What he calls all or nothingism or something. So let's start with that.
Yeah. That's not really dealing adequately with the subject matter if you're going to refer to your opponent's ideology in that way, right? So we don't think of Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison and William Wilberforce as all or nothingists, right? There's no historical category for all or nothingists. What we espouse is abolitionism, immediatism, right? A policy, a strategy of calling for the immediate abolition of abortion and the rejection of compromise. And we think that is wise biblically. We think that is wise pragmatically in how things work out in the political world and how it works out in the culture. We think that drawing a hard line and not budging from it is the way to cause political and cultural change most effectively.
No matter how long it takes.
Right. And it's worth throwing in a note here that this is the exact same position as the Doug Wilson's Smash Mouth incrementalists. It's no different. It's the exact same thing. We're not going to be satisfied with what we're asking for in incremental bills, but we're going to keep coming back and asking for more, but we take as much as we can get. Yeah. And that's exactly the Smash Mouth incrementalist approach.
It's the position of the pro-life movement for the past 50 years, I would say. And we don't think, sometimes you can straw man abolitionists are being like mean, but I don't think any of us think that any of the pro-life leaders or organizations or anything are only wanting an increment. They're all wanting this increment now and then another increment later. And so the best way to just charitably, intellectually, responsibly deal with this is a policy of calling for total immediate abolition versus a policy of calling for incremental gains towards abolition. And neither of them have anything to do with how long it takes or anything. It's just like, what is your bill? Does your bill say abortion is murder? Abortion, all of it should be abolished. All babies should be protected. Do you advocate that bill, or do you advocate abortion should be prohibited from this specific people group at this specific time or in this specific way? So
on that point, I think it would be good to get into a few different examples of incremental pro-life bills to kind of illustrate this point. And a good place to start would be to talk about the one that Matt Walsh brought up. So he brought up he brought up the Down syndrome abortion ban, right? Which he admits, interestingly, like abolitionists, we make this point to pro-lifers all the time, right? These bills don't do anything. He basically admits yes, this bill doesn't do anything. He says, I don't see how this could save a single life.
Yeah.
Right. Because you just tell the abortionist, I'm going to have the abortion, murder my child for some other reason. Yep. And then you can do it. But that is the type of bill that pro-lifers pass and raise tons of money on and get, politicians get reelected on, and they campaign as pro-life heroes for bills like that.
And most of the times they don't seem to understand like that you could go in and dismember, brutally, destroy your Down syndrome baby, and the abortionist could say, is this because it has Down syndrome? And you could say, no, it's because I don't want them. Okay, good.
Or it's a Tuesday, or it's a Thursday.
It's a Tuesday, just because. And so I think that his getting that isn't always seen, so we appreciate that he realizes that there's an easy workaround, that the bill is kind of pointless.
Well, there's not a whole lot of incentive here on Matt's part. It's not as though his podcast stands or falls on whether or not pro-life victories are achieved. Right to life, they have to say we're saving this many babies because of our Down syndrome abortion ban.
That's a good point.
They have to tell people that their money is doing something.
Yeah.
There's not really any of that incentive on Matt's part. So I think that's one of the main reasons why Matt just sees, if this isn't going to save anybody, which is what we've been saying for a long time. But a lot of the pro-life professionals will insist that they're saving hundreds.
Oh, yeah. In the fundraising letters, it's always, we're saving. Because you can take the number of Down syndrome babies who are aborted and then just say, because of this, that number's, and then that's why you see these, 40,000 babies will be saved by this increment.
Yeah.
But it's a good example because you say you've got a state like Oklahoma where you have pro-lifers literally dominating the Senate, the House, the governor's office, everything, and they were going to pass a bill, a bill protecting babies from being aborted because of Down syndrome, but not abolishing abortion as murder just because it's murder? Or are you going to advocate and fight for a bill that says you can't abort babies for any reason because it's all murder?
Yeah.
But what Matt's saying is like, yes, this one's pointless, but you still should still do it.
It makes the Democrats look bad
and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But he does set it up. Now, let's look at a more, I guess, a better pro-life bill, or one that they are more proud of.
Yeah.
In the dismemberment bill.
The Down syndrome ban is by no means the only bill that would be in this category of incremental bills that don't save any lives, right? There are lots and lots, probably the majority, that there's no way you could ever see this saving a life. Now, another one is the dismemberment abortion ban. Let me read from, this is U.S. H.R. 3515. Abortionists may not dismember a living unborn child through the use of clamps, grasping forceps, tongs, scissors, or similar instruments. This does not include an abortion which uses suction to dismember the body of the unborn child. So you can't dismember a child this way, but you can just dismember the child in this way.
Yeah.
Right? That is that's an incremental pro-life bill that they tout as the, as the bee's knees. This is why you should fund us. This is why you should vote for this politician, because we passed this, and so we're pro-life heroes. That's the pro-life game, passing bills that don't do anything, or that make the Democrats look bad, and now we're the pro-life heroes, even though we're doing nothing.
Yeah.
That is the political game.
And it's totally legitimate that you would pass a bill in your own language saying you can dismember a baby with a suction device. You can do that.
Yeah.
It's okay to write that into law and pass it, so long as next session you write another bill that says you can't dismember a baby with suction.
Yeah.
And so that's the argument that he's making. He favors that view, but an abolitionist is like, no, abortion's all murder, abolish it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the moral case that is made by pro-lifers is, as long as it works, then you're doing the right thing. You're saving some babies. But it's a good thing that Matt starts from this position of, this might not do anything at all, because it kind of takes away that practical argument for why someone would do that. It takes away a lot of the force of that practical argument. Yeah. And abolitionists are arguing there is a moral, biblical reason for opposing these. There's also a practical reason for opposing these. And if you take away the practical for pro-lifers, it really undercuts the entire case. And so I think that's important so for both with the dismemberment abortion ban and with the Down syndrome ban, there's not a reasonable expectation that any babies are going to be saved at all. But also with the dismemberment abortion ban, you're specifically saying this is how you can kill some babies, which we think is biblically absurd.
So you can actually oppose a bill because of that reason.
Yeah. Like there's no way that someone who is following their Bible would say, let's write a bill that says you can murder babies in this way. And then the Down syndrome abortion ban, has the implication that you can kill other babies. Even if it doesn't explicitly say you can kill babies in A, B, or C way, it does say this is a protected category. Everyone else that's preborn can be murdered.
Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, that's a really important point. In all of these bills, you've got either an implicit approval of murder or an explicit approval of murder. So here in the dismemberment abortion ban, you have an explicit approval of murder.
Yeah.
Here is how you can murder a human being. And then, as you mentioned, even in bills that don't have it explicitly, it's implicit. If you say you can't murder children after 20 weeks, you're saying you can murder them up to 20 weeks. So it's either implicit or explicit approval of murder. And so the question is, what does God think about that law?
Yeah. And why does it ultimately not really save any lives? When you write a bill that sort of like implicitly, says abortion is okay, like, but you can't for this reason, why does that always time and time again not pan out? Well, not just because God doesn't like it, but because God likes things that work and are good. And these are schemes. And so when you look at, it's not just for Down syndrome. It'll be like for the sex of a baby is another popular one. Why do these pass? Well, because both sides know it's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Like they know it's not going to put a burden on a mother's right to terminate her child. And we abolitionists go, well, that is the thing. That's the thing that we're challenging. Why step away? And so you're never going to gain any ground on ending abortion, abolishing abortion. You're never going to do anything if you're not actually putting your finger on that problem.
Yeah. Until you keep the main thing, right? Yeah. If we're arguing about abortion and we're arguing about everything except we're not making the case abortion is murder. It should be treated as murder.
Yeah.
If you're straying from that, if you're passing bills saying you can't do it for this reason or abortion's bad because of, the targeting of boys or targeting of girls or targeting of kids with Down syndrome, you're not making any ground on the main thing.
Yeah.
You're leaving the main thing completely aside, and the cultural impact of that, of not making the main thing is really, really bad.
Yeah, well, also, when you say that God likes things that work, there's a reason that bills that call for abolition, if people were to pass them, that are nullification, that say the Supreme Court is wrong, we should not listen to them. There's a reason that would work, and that's because it's standing on an objective standard, and it's saying human beings deserve the right to life, and we should not deprive them of it, and it's honoring to God.
Yeah.
God's not going to bless bills that say, you can kill the fatherless child who's conceived in rape. You can kill babies that don't have Down syndrome. You can kill any of the given children that are not protected by incremental bills. God does not bless that kind of thing. That's why one of the points of abolitionism is that we're providential. We're not pragmatic. We're not saying you can do anything as long as it has some expectation that it might save some babies.
Yeah.
We're saying you can only do things that God says, this is what you must do. This is my demand for justice.
Yeah.
So that gives you a reasonable expectation that you're going to see success when you're doing things that honor God, if God is in control of everything, and He is. So this pro-life, there's a reason pro-life bills have not worked to abolish abortion and will never work to abolish abortion, and that's because God hates them.
Yeah.
He hates iniquitous decrees.
And they're self-refuting. Everyone who watches our show pretty much is and we want people to understand that really we need God on our side. Doing things that God wouldn't do or hasn't commanded us to do is not a wise way to go if God is in fact real. But if you're wanting to look at it, do these bills kind of refute themselves? Do they? At the end of the video, he talks about how they, it actually puts Democrats on the hook. Well, like these bills put Republicans on the hook. Like when you make an argument, you can't murder babies because they have a beating heart, and then you say, well, I'm going to go back and put forward another bill, and you put forward a different bill. The culture and the rest of the legislation will be like, no, you said abortion was wrong because it stopped a beating heart. Yeah. Now you're changing it.
And I have an actual example of that happening. I used to live in Ohio, and I met with my state senator, who was a pro-life champion, right? It was a conservative district that I was in, and his aide literally tells me, this is very interesting, this whole abolition, immediate abolition thing, but it's Senator Brenner's personal religious conviction that life begins at a heartbeat. Yeah. Right? That's insane, and it comes from championing the heartbeat bill.
But he can't go back the next year and say, actually, abortion should be abolished from conception. He's already told them the reason abortion is wrong is because of a beating heart. Yeah. Or the reason abortion is wrong is because of pain. Or the reason abortion is wrong is because it's unjust towards this gender or that race or this chromosomal, makeup. It's like they are not arguing for the thing that they say they're arguing for. And so they kind of undermine themselves. So it's not just that God doesn't support these. It's like we know that they're incoherent and self-refuting.
Yep. And so I think we'll get to the practical, pragmatic case against these bills in a second here. But one last point that I think will be good to touch on a little bit more, Sam, you touched on it very briefly, is the iniquitous decrees point. Yeah. So just is this bill, like what does God think about a bill that says you cannot dismember a child this way, but you can, here's how to dismember a human being made in my image. Mm-hmm. What does God think about a bill that says that? When we look at Isaiah 10:1, right? Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees. Is this iniquitous?
Yeah.
There's no way to argue that this dismemberment abortion ban is not iniquitous. It absolutely, objectively is evil to tell someone, here's how you can murder a child. Objectively, that's evil. Now, the case you would have to make is, well, it's less evil than the status quo, or it's less evil than some other bill.
It saves some lives, so therefore it's right. That's like the way that they argue for it. The problem is they don't ever seem to understand that they're practicing child sacrifice in the battle to end child sacrifice. They are literally sacrificing these babies without this attribute, or babies murdered in this way, to save babies murdered in that way. And so that has an effect. That's why these don't work. 50 years of doing this has just basically ingrained child sacrifice is okay.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah, and just to give a quick overview, we've done 2 full episodes on the biblical arguments for abolition.
Yep.
But just to give a quick overview of what the Bible has to say about why we should be immediatists, you can look at the example of Moses dealing with Pharaoh. His constant demand was, let my people go. He was not saying, I'll take the women and the children, and you can keep the men.
When
I'll
Pharaoh
take the women and the
offered
children.
increments.
Mm-hmm. Pharaoh kept offering increments. That was the response of the tyrant. That wasn't the response of Moses. So biblically, the example that we have is do not compromise. Do not accept lesser standards of what God's law is. Rather, only accept the things that God would have us do. We see that in another example with the 10 spies who go into the future land of Egypt, or the 12 spies. And 10 of them come back saying that we're not going to, Canaan. 10 of them come back saying that we can't go in there, there's giants, and 2 of them say, God's going to give them into our hands, let's go. 10 spies end up dying, and the 2 that said that we should go back in, they end up inheriting the land 40 years later. So we should not compromise, and it does not matter what your opponent is. It doesn't matter if they're giants descended from the sons of the Anakim or whatever. All that matters is you're going in and obeying God, and God is going to give them into your hands, and you should trust that God is going to give them into your hands. Yeah. So that seems absurd to a lot of people who have a very secular mindset here, because we always say that the pro-life movement is secularly minded, but people who are not thinking providentially will not get that. And so I would encourage anyone listening to this, go back and look at the biblical arguments for abolitionism.
Episode 4.
Mm-hmm. Episode 4, and we also did another episode later on. I can't remember what the number is on that one.
Maybe 63 or 64.
Yeah. There's very good biblical reasons for not supporting incremental bills, and that's important to get. That's the most important thing to get, I would say.
Yep.
Yeah, and then lo and behold, the Bible is not a foolish book with foolish advice, and so doing what the Bible says is actually the wisest, most effective thing.
Yep.
And so, getting back to Matt's the way he talked about it, he does call it murder. So another way to look at this is like in the debate is like, are we going to support bills that treat it as murder or bills that treat it as though it's not murder? Mm-hmm. He inadvertently argues that it's okay to support any number of bills for however long it takes that don't treat abortion as murder, as so long as you are eventually going to do that. We're advocates of doing that first and that only, because whenever you advocate bills that don't treat it as murder, you're sort of, again, ingraining that in the culture. Abortion isn't murder. Abortion isn't wrong. Killing babies because of Down syndrome is wrong. Abortion isn't wrong. Killing babies that feeling pain is wrong. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
as we kind of transition into the next point here, I think there's a good transition point. So last thing we talked about, the ends don't justify the means, right? And so we can't say this is going to achieve some good ends. It's going to get us closer to the goal of abolition or whatever. Therefore, let's do this incrementally and save some lives along the way. That's bad. That's bad morally for the reasons we just explained. It's also foolish strategically. Because what we see in polling, right? What we see in polling is that about half the country is pro-life, and about 12% of the country actually wants abortion completely abolished from conception. And so what does that mean? That means that when we've given up our foundations, when we say the ends justify the means, so let's compromise and take little by little by little, what happens is the culture is educated, like my old state senator in Ohio. He's educated, and apparently, according to polling, 3/4 of the pro-life movement is educated that life doesn't actually begin at conception. Abortion isn't actually murder. And polling, again, this isn't just our numbers, right? The Pew polling is about 1/4 of people who identify as pro-life want abortion completely abolished from conception.
Yeah.
And so compromising on this is bad morally. It's bad biblically. God would not support it. It's absolutely detrimental to the cause because you've watered down the pro-life movement to such a degree that 3/4 of the people in your movement don't even believe your foundations. So you can't give up your foundations because it's morally bad. You can't give them up because now you have a bunch of people who don't even believe your foundations.
Yeah, and you've conditioned them.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, compromise breeds compromise, and that's where we get the current status quo for abortion. In the Roe v. Wade decision, they were pointing to Texas's laws that said that a mother is exempt from being punished. So when we compromise on our, and that's what the pro-life movement wants to go back to. They want to go back to a situation where equal justice is not the standard, and mothers who murder their babies are exempt from any kind of punishment. So even where we got the current abortion laws and standards in America came from a compromise on what God would have us do with abortion. So compromise breeds compromise, but then we're also in the situation that we're currently in because of compromised laws that were on the books. And we should not do that. We should not go back to that standard, and we should ask for a standard that God would actually have us do.
And so, and the false standard is always being supported as a substitute for the true standard.
Yeah.
And that's, so we have the iniquitous decrees problem, God wouldn't support a problem. The other problem with a lot of this pro-life legislation is that it's substitute. It's being supported in the place of abolition. As I always say that, like, take a state like Oklahoma or Texas where you have all the votes you need, and take whatever pro-life bill they passed and say it could have been abolition. There was nothing, because you can take it, they'll pass like a heartbeat bill, and then you could email everyone who voted for it, do you want more? And they'd all be smash mouth incrementalists and say, yes, I wanted more. I'll go get
the vast majority, at least.
Yeah. Enough to pass it.
Well,
enough to pass it.
They would be in a lot of cases if the abortion ban in Texas that went through, and then one that goes through in Oklahoma. A lot of people after that are under the impression that it's actually been abolished, or that abortion's no longer happening in Texas or in Oklahoma. So one of the practical consequences of these bills is that a lot of people, instead of not being satisfied with this type of thing, end up thinking we did it, or somehow we've gotten to a standard that's good. And that's how you get people, like James is saying, more and more being okay with compromises because they think their pro-life majority governors and legislators and all of that have done laws that are right and moral and consistent with being pro-life.
Yeah. Like people saying, abortion's been abolished in Texas. What are you doing out in front of this clinic? Well, I've seen 25 people murdered this morning.
Yeah.
But the headlines, the bill, so it is another thing. But there's an effect on passing substitute bills that sort of water everyone down, change the standard, channel the energy away, and then mislead people. So, and I don't think it's working.
Yeah, let's really hone in on that aspect of these bills being substitutes for abolition. So Matt Walsh says in that clip, whatever can happen right now to protect as many kids as possible, do it, and then tomorrow do something else. As you said, in Oklahoma, in Texas, in Indiana, so we've had abolition bills introduced in more than a dozen states, and in 9 of those states, pro-lifers control everything, the Senate, the House, and the governor's mansion. In those states, what can happen right now to protect as many kids as possible? Passing the bill that nullifies Roe v. Wade and abolishes abortion immediately. Now, why don't those pass? Why doesn't a bill that nullifies Roe and abolishes abortion immediately, why doesn't it pass in those 9 states? Because incrementalism.
Yeah, because they passed something else.
They passed something else instead, and a bunch of conservative, some maybe well-meaning, some probably less well-meaning, just self-serving politicians and lobbyists celebrate those bills as if they're the greatest pro-life victory ever, when there's a bill to abolish abortion, and the very people who passed the incremental bill, the Down syndrome abortion ban, the dismemberment ban, the heartbeat bill, the 20-week ban, whatever it be, the very people who passed that killed the bill that would have abolished abortion.
Yep.
And so why are babies murdered in Oklahoma right now, in Texas today, in Indiana, Idaho, South Carolina, all these states?
Smash mouth incrementalism.
Smash mouth incrementalism is why babies are still murdered in those states.
And
so
they say it like it's a good thing.
It's in no way then all or nothing. No, we're never asking for nothing. We're always asking for something, the abolition of abortion. But the things that people do instead of nothing get in the way of the thing that we must do.
Exactly.
They're the excuse that pro-lifers use year after year after year. They'll point to the dismemberment abortion ban. They'll point to the Down syndrome abortion ban. And they'll say, look, I'm so pro-life. I'm doing this for the preborn. I'm saving this many babies. And that is that's the thing that they do to delay abolition.
Yeah. And sadly, the smash mouth thing is what they want to do.
Yeah.
Like think of it negatively. I want to run another anti-abortion bill next year. That doesn't justify doing less. Like wanting to continue to run bills is not a good thing. But smash mouth incrementalism is like flipped it around.
Yeah.
Saying like, as long as you're committed to going back and getting more later, it's okay. Well, no, you shouldn't be committed to lengthening this battle.
Right.
Babies are murdered.
Let's talk about a few concrete examples of this happening, because we're talking about just ideas here,
Yeah,
right? But this has happened before. So we've seen, say, Jeff Leach in Texas. So in 2019, there was a bill that would have nullified Roe versus Wade, abolished abortion immediately, and you would think in a state like Texas, come and take it. We're Texas, we're sovereign state, all that stuff. You would think a bill like that might pass. Why didn't it pass? Because that bill was assigned to Jeff Leach's committee. Now, Jeff Leach knew he did not want to pass that bill. He had meetings with pro-life leaders. I think Governor Abbott as well said he doesn't want that bill to reach his desk. And so what does Jeff Leach do? He knows that lots and lots of Christians are going to be outraged. Right? That hearing for that abolition bill in Texas had more than 300 abolitionists testifying. I think you were there that day. Went till 3 a.m. That hearing went till 3 a.m.
Very long day.
And so Jeff Leach knows that if he kills this bill, he's going to have all this outrage against him. But he knows he needs to kill it. So what does he do? 3 days after he receives the bill to his committee, he says, oh, shoot, I need to do something pro-life. So he authors the, what was it? It was
Born Alive Infant Protection Act.
Yes, Born Alive Infant Protection
If a baby
Act.
survives abortion, you have to help them.
Yes. And that bill passes, HB 16 in 2019. That bill passes. The abolition bill does not. Jeff Leach kills it, doesn't even allow it to be voted on in committee. But his Born Alive Infant Protection Act, again, another bill that does nothing, will not save any lives, passes. And he is awarded by Texas Alliance for Life the Courageous Defender of Life Award 2019. Jeff Leach, the man who kept abortion legal.
Yeah.
But what he's really done is he's kept the pro-life industry alive.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to. Like, some people think this is really negative, but we've seen it so many times. The other examples we're about to go into. You kill a bill of abolition, you pass an increment, you get celebrated, and you get to smash mouth go back for more.
Yeah. Well, here's a
50 freaking years.
Yeah, here's a practical thing for people like Matt Walsh and those who like incremental bills. We hate incremental bills. We think they're terrible. But if you liked incremental bills, you would call for the immediate abolition of abortion, and you would say you hated incremental bills. Because as soon as you start calling for the immediate abolition of abortion, they start passing dozens of pro-life bills out of the same committees that kill the abolition bills. Which is what happened with Stephanie Click.
Yeah.
So Stephanie Click was also in Texas, but this was last year.
Yep, 2021.
And she passes 12, I believe,
12
pro-life incremental bills out of the same committee where she kills the abolition bill. Yeah. And this happens time and time again. Every single time you get an abolition bill passed, you get historic numbers of incremental bills.
An abolition bill introduced.
Yeah, an abolition bill
introduced,
And they'll pass things that they formerly would not even have dreamed of.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, places where like heartbeat bills were too extreme, well, all of a sudden, if you have an abolition bill there and it's getting a lot of support, heartbeat bills like everyone accepts.
Yeah.
As long as there's an increment and we can keep this thing going, we'll support it. But like you said, it was 9 in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So in Oklahoma, we actually passed and signed 9 pro-life bills into law. So Governor Stitt signed 9 pro-life bills, and then he had 3 ceremonial events to sign all 9, right, to tout how pro-life. And then, Stephanie Click, like you said, she kills the abolition bill in Texas. Then she passes 12 pro-life bills out of her committee. Not all of those were signed into law, but out of her committee came 12 pro-life bills. And so what happens? Texas Alliance for Life, or Texas Right to Life, awards Stephanie Click, the woman who kept abortion legal in Texas, awards her the pro-life hero of the year in Texas.
Yeah, and they're fighting tooth and nail to keep her in office because an abolitionist, David Lowe, is running against her.
Yep.
We can't have people in here trying to abolish abortion. That's our bread and butter. But that point that if you like incremental bills, you should like donate to Free the States because what we'll do is we'll put so much pressure on passing a bill of total and immediate abolition that in response to that and everyone demanding that, they'll pass a bunch of pointless incrementalist rubbish that you can be all happy about. Like, look at it. The states where you have abolition bills are the states where you have tons of incremental bills being passed. Because they're trying to save face. Now we don't believe that they save a lot of lives, but if you think they save a lot of lives, shoot for the stars and you're going to end up somewhere in the heavens or whatever however that statement goes. Call for total and immediate abolition, and in response they're too scared to do that, but they will come up with innumerable little incremental things for you to celebrate to look good.
Yeah, here in Oklahoma, where the abolitionist movement has made a lot of progress, 9 pro-life bills in a single year signed into law.
And then the next year,
a bunch more. Yeah, I think I've lived in Oklahoma 3 years, and I think it was 9 pro-life bills, 3 and 3. So we passed 15 pro-life bills in my 3 years of living in Oklahoma. There are pro-life states where there haven't even been 10 pro-life bills signed into law in 48 years.
Just have James Silberman move to your state.
That wasn't the point.
And 15 incremental bills.
I realized how it sounded after I said it, but that wasn't the point.
No, it is true. Yeah. I mean, you see it in history too. It's like when the abolitionist, like Doug Wilson in his video, he made that point. It's like the pro-life movement kept this issue alive long enough to develop a hard right or whatever we are, hard right wing. And it's like, we do exist now because the pro-life movement has failed for 50 years, and our calling for abortion to be abolished has actually made the pro-lifers do more of what they're doing. Now, I don't think that's the right response. I think they need to become abolitionists. They have the power, they have the votes, they have the ability.
Yeah, become abolitionists for the right reasons.
And to do it.
Well, also, I mean, even Matt Walsh says in that video, he says, don't be satisfied with it. Well, that's just exactly what we're doing. We're not satisfied with it before it's passed. We're not satisfied with it after it's passed. We're saying that this is a bad bill from the very start. And if someone wants to see more of these bills, like we've said, be dissatisfied from the very start, because these bills are immoral. They're wicked. They say that you can kill babies. So get away from that. Don't do that. And practically how that works out is you get more of the bills that you say that you like. So, don't do it.
But we are not advocating for incrementalism in this. We're just pointing out that that where abolitionism is called for, incrementalism occurs.
If you're an abolitionist, you should be an abolitionist, and if you're an incrementalist, you should also be an abolitionist.
And if you say things like never be satisfied, you really should be an abolitionist then. You're not satisfied the moment that the governor signs that you're not allowed to abort babies because they have Down syndrome. You should be saying the same things we're saying. What we need is a bill that abolishes abortion because it's murder. Let's get to the point. Let's nullify the unjust, unconstitutional ruling that the Supreme Court made. Let's establish justice in the state for preborn babies. That's where we need to go for. I'm not satisfied until we get there. Therefore, that's what I'm calling for. You can't say you're not satisfied and you want more and not ever call for what we're calling for.
The reason that we're getting an accelerated amount of incremental pro-life bills out of the state house in Oklahoma is because the people in Oklahoma are scared for their jobs. They have to pass at this point 9 pro-life bills in order for themselves to be able to sell to pro-lifers here in Oklahoma. We're doing something.
They have to deceive people at this point.
Because we put a lot of pressure on them to pass an abolition bill, and the game is ending for a lot of them. We've already gotten legislators elected on abolitionist platforms, committing to only do abolitionist bills and rejecting all incremental bills. So the tide is sort of shifting in our favor here. And I think that if Matt Walsh were to get a hold of the idea that we can abolish abortion right now, we can defy the Supreme Court right now, that's something that we're able to do, and that's something that God would have us do. A lot of the arguments that exist in the minds of pro-lifers for why this is a good thing to do evaporate. They just go away. Because as soon as you say we can defy the Supreme Court, like they do with marijuana, like sanctuary cities do with having illegal immigrants in their cities,
with gay marriage,
like they did with gay marriage was a Supreme Court decision.
But the Supreme Court said that gay marriage wasn't constitutional, and then states started having gay marriage anyway
until they switched.
And then the Supreme Court's like, oh, my bad, we'll make it constitutional.
Yeah.
So we're saying that same thing, states should just abolish abortion, criminalize it within their borders.
Yeah.
Until the Supreme Court, we heard your ruling. We're going to uphold the Constitution, the law of God.
Yeah, it's a good thing you clarified that, because that is, I mean, that's a super solid argument for, hey, look, the left has done this. Why do you think they're victorious? Because they continue to win because they will defy federal rules and laws for their insane ideology.
If the upcoming Supreme Court actually does repeal Roe, like all the pro-lifers that's all the eggs are going in that basket, you'll see state after state, leftist state after state, still doing abortion.
Yeah,
in defiance.
And the really important thing to note here for a lot of people who think we can't do nullification is Jeff Leach, Stephanie Click, and Greg Treat, all of these people that we've mentioned so far, actually, they gave an oath to uphold the Constitution, and in passing all of these pro-life bills, they ignored it. They did not uphold their oath. Their oath is to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution is not pro-abortion. It's against abortion. You cannot read the 14th Amendment and think that you can allow for abortion.
Yeah, and further than that, it's the equal protection of the law shall not be denied to any person within the jurisdiction of any state in the Union.
Yeah.
And so what do we have there? We have the equal protection of the law must be provided. Murder of any class of human beings cannot be allowed. It's not just neutral on it, as a lot of the pro-life attorneys and groups say. It should be abolished. And if you take an oath to the Constitution, as you said, you must abolish abortion. And so these pro-life incremental laws, yes, they're unbiblical, but they're unconstitutional. Right? You are with a dismemberment abortion ban, a 20-week ban, you are denying the equal protection of the law to humans up to the point that you're allowing abortion.
Because that's literally what it's doing. Like, no person shall be denied equal protection of the right to life, so on and so forth. But we're saying that these persons who don't have Down syndrome are not going to be protected like these persons who do.
Yeah.
You know, given that that's the reason. But like, that's the way pro-life bills are written. They're all sort of like protect this over that.
Yeah.
That's the partiality towards one person over another. Or they'll be written to show partiality towards like the mother who's choosing to have the abortion. She gets special murder rights that the person she's hiring doesn't. And so all of these bills, they're unjust, they're ungodly, they're a waste of time, they're a substitute. And we advocate the don't support self-refuting, unbiblical bills that don't save any lives that God also doesn't like.
That delay abolition.
That's our abolitionist view. To call that all or nothingism, kind of sidesteps what we're advocating.
Yeah.
But Walsh, I don't know him, and I haven't watched a ton of his stuff, but I see things and I like a lot of it,
Yeah.
And so I think that we probably have a guy here who, if he really looked deeply, okay, what are the abolitionists advocating and why? What are their arguments? I'm not so sure that he would just straw man us as all or nothingists. He'd be like, these guys are not all or nothingists. They have this sort of worked out position.
Yeah.
And he might very well be on our side. I don't know.
So wrapping up this point about how incremental bills are a substitute for abolition bills to help politicians get reelected, even if they're keeping abortion legal, one of the things that really persuaded me of abolitionism, Russell, is your quote: "The key to keeping abortion legal is a never-ending stream of incremental pro-life victories." And that's what I've seen in state after state after state, in not just in Texas, in Oklahoma with Greg Treat, in Missouri with Bob Onder. The key to preventing the passage of a bill to abolish abortion immediately is to pass incremental bill after incremental bill after incremental bill to delude the pro-lifers, the well-meaning Christians in that state, that they're winning when they're not, when child sacrifice is occurring at the behest of the politicians who refuse to abolish it.
Yeah. And there's really no more reasonable denial of that point anymore. We've just seen it evidenced time and time and time again. A lot of people, I've talked to some pro-lifers who think that we're sort of causing a constitutional crisis if we nullify the Supreme Court. But it should be clear that the thing that causes the constitutional crisis is when the Supreme Court is allowed to do this and states do not retaliate by saying we're not going to listen to you. We actually have to uphold our duty before God and our oath to the Constitution and ignore you on this. That's what we must do. And the constitutional crisis comes up when you're not checked for it, when the Supreme Court is allowed to go about doing this kind of thing. And now they're to a point where they continue to pass all kinds of, they continue to decide all kinds of insane ridiculous, evil decisions. And the left's response to it is to talk about court packing now and to talk about all these different things as if it really matters. The Supreme Court has been dead wrong on so much for so long because states have not checked them on what they need to check them on, and they've checked them on other things. They've done that with marijuana and all kinds of other things, but they just haven't done it on the things that their main duty is to uphold justice. Their main duty is to check them on this. So I think that as soon as you get people thinking in terms of how our system was set up, what our founders intended for states to do in this kind of situation, then you're going to get people who start passing laws that are consistent with what the Constitution says and not ridiculous dismemberment and Down syndrome bans.
And there's an inevitability for a bill of abolition, right? At some point in time, that's what it's going to have to be. So anything done before that is sort of like drawing it out. But we have to make a decision. Is it a mother's right constitutionally or naturally to be able to terminate her children in the womb? Is that good, bad? Are we going to protect that or not protect that? That's the basic thing. Putting anything before that is delaying it, and it doesn't make it better if you say, well, we do want to get to that incrementally. And so evidentially we've got 50 years, and we know that regardless of what happens, that's what they're saying they want. So why not advocate for what they want now?
Yeah,
is kind of the two sides here.
And one other point on that, if you have the ability, like, as we've talked about, in all these states where we have the ability to abolish abortion, where might the idea that we should not abolish abortion come from? Like, what might be the origin of that idea? Like, let's think of this spiritually. Might the devil be looking at a state like Oklahoma, where 80% of the populace hates abortion or professes to hate abortion? 80% of the legislature professes to hate abortion. 89%. And so how does Satan look at that, and what might he think? How do I keep child sacrifice going in a state where 85% of the population wants abortion to be abolished?
And a majority also believe that there's a need for nullification. For other things.
Right. Yeah. So might he think, well, the only way to keep a child sacrifice going is to keep the Christians in that state from unifying around the idea of immediately abolishing it, to gradually delay that abolition perpetually by passing these delusive pro-life bills that do absolutely nothing, and convincing the pro-lifers and the Christians that they're winning with these pro-life bills that even many pro-lifers admit don't do anything. Might that be how Satan looks at a state like Oklahoma and tries to keep abortion legal? Well,
I would say we don't know what Satan is looking and thinking, but we do know what's happened over the past 50 years.
Yeah.
Like this isn't theoretical. This is very concrete. We know that in a state like Oklahoma, you have abolition bills, you have pro-life bills. If the only thing that was being put forward, there's just one bill, should abortion be criminalized as murder, and you didn't have competing substitutes, it would have to pass in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So creating the increments and saying, don't worry, folks, we'll have more increments next year, that makes it okay.
Yeah.
Is what delays it. I think we've made that clear, but this is not theoretical pie in the sky type stuff.
Yeah.
We have 50 years of evidence of favoring increments over abolition.
Well, it's exactly the point that Elizabeth Hyrick made.
That's what I was going to next.
She said that if we can be brought to acquiesce for even a day or a month or a year, we can be brought to acquiesce for an unlimited duration. And that's exactly what's happened with the pro-life movement. Yeah. It's allowing people to be satisfied with supposed steps towards abolition and creating in them an indifference towards the injustice.
And they flipped it and they've called it positive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like it's okay as long as there's a future increment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whereas the abolitionists, we have been calling people to be dissatisfied, which every successful reform movement in the past calls for. They call for people to be dissatisfied with the status quo and to immediately change it. They're not asking for increments.
Justice delayed is justice denied.
Yeah, they're really. And this is something that was kind of weird. I worked for a pro-life movement for a long time. We read Frederick Douglass's biography. We read Martin Luther King. We read a lot of these successful reform movements of the past, and it was totally blind to a lot of the stuff that they were saying. Like even Martin Luther King he's not the perfect role model for in a lot of ways.
For a lot of other things.
For a
but
lot
he
of other
understood
things.
that to get change.
Yeah. He called gradualism a tranquilizing drug. And gradualism and incrementalism are synonyms. It's the exact same thing, just a different name nowadays. But it is a tranquilizing drug. It puts you to sleep. It puts people to sleep. It's done it for a very long time.
Oh, yeah.
And now we're to a point where, as James said, only 12% of the population wants to see abortion abolished. That was not the case when this started. That was not the case in 1973.
Yeah. When someone comes up to me after service yesterday, we're filming on Monday, so on Sunday, and says, "Congratulations, we did it! We did it! Abortion's abolished in Oklahoma. How happy are you?" And I'm just like, okay, so this is a person who obviously is not right now going to be fighting abortion because they think that it's been done. And then I have to be the bad guy who says, well, we haven't, and all that kind of stuff. But that's just like one person that just I kind of know that has me mixed up. But that's like the whole state. Well, how do you keep, millions of Christians in Oklahoma from fighting tooth and nail to abolish abortion? Get them to believe that that's happened.
Yeah.
And then do it again next year and next year and next year. So, and again, none of this becomes okay because you want to do it in the future.
Yeah, it's all really built on the foundation of judicial supremacy. And if you give up that idea that we should not obey the Supreme Court no matter what they say, then the very reasonable conclusion is let's abolish abortion right now. Let's not wait.
And I think Matt would probably agree with us on that there are times the Supreme Court oversteps their bounds so far, they go into such genocidal evil that we can disobey them. Like I think Walsh would probably agree with us on that. And so, like you said, if that's true, if we can abolish abortion right now in defiance of the Supreme Court, if we can nullify Roe, if the governor and the attorney general can instruct everyone underneath them to enforce the abolition of abortion, then why aren't we?
Yeah.
Why aren't we? There's no reason. There's no good reason except that we've been tricked and deluded by the tranquilizing drug of gradualism into thinking that this is the best way to do it.
And even in our case, we take it a step further, and even if the Constitution said explicitly that you must obey the Supreme Court or that you can murder babies, we would burn the Constitution. We would ignore it. We would establish justice right now.
And that would cause
God would have us do.
And that would cause the Constitution to be changed. Yeah. Like in a certain sense, the abolitionists in the 19th century were looking at it and were like, slavery is kind of accepted in the Constitution. Well, let's, and so they were doing things like people were like, oh, the audacity. They were doing things like publicly, one of them burned the Constitution, or said that he would and all that kind of thing. Well, lo and behold, 13th Amendment, the Constitution had to be changed. So what this person was calling for ended up having to be done. And there was a delay of like 25 years for that. And so what we're calling for is going to inevitably have to be that question, is the Supreme Court right or wrong, is going to have to be asked and answered. They're wrong. Is abortion right or wrong? It's going to have to be asked and answered. Anything before that is just delaying it.
Yeah.
And I think that if Matt Walsh would, be willing to wrap his mind around all these points and others, he would be on our side, as would lots of other reasonable pro-lifers. But how does he say it in the clip? He says something like, well, this is my position, and I don't see how anyone could have a different.
Yeah, I don't see how you can side with anything other than the incrementalist approach as long as you're not satisfied with an incremental law.
Yeah, that would sum up why in a culture where we have ultrasounds where you can look at little babies wiggling in the womb at 9 weeks, how in that culture that claims to believe in human rights have you not abolished abortion? That view.
Yep. So one final point in closing on this, for Matt Walsh, who might disagree with us, or anyone else who might disagree with us, you are disagreeing with us, but beyond that, I think you're disagreeing with God's word, as we have explained our position on that. But even in addition to that, you're disagreeing with the abolitionists of slavery, right? You're disagreeing with Wilberforce and Hyrick and Garrison and Douglas and all of these people. And so I said earlier, if we look at this spiritually, how might Satan keep abortion legal in Oklahoma? Gradualism, right? That sounds real harsh, but I'm going to read you something from Abolitionist of Slavery, Elizabeth Hyrick. Here's what she had to say. The enemies of slavery have hitherto ruined the abolitionist cause by the senseless cry of gradual emancipation. It is marvelous that the wise and good should have suffered themselves to have been imposed upon by this wily artifice of the slaveholder. For with him, the project of gradual emancipation must first have originated. So it originated with the slaveholder, gradualism. The slaveholder knew very well that his prey would be secure so long as the abolitionist could be cajoled into a demand for gradual instead of immediate abolition. He knew very well that the contemplation of a gradual emancipation would beget a gradual indifference to emancipation itself. He knew very well that even the wise and the good may by habit and familiarity be brought to endure and tolerate almost anything. Skipping down a little bit. This gradual abolition has been the grand marplot of human virtue and happiness, the very masterpiece of satanic policy. By converting the cry for immediate into gradual emancipation, the prince of slaveholders, Satan, transformed himself with astonishing dexterity into an angel of light and thereby deceived the very elect. He saw very clearly that if public justice and humanity, especially if Christian justice and humanity, could be brought to demand only a gradual extermination of the enormities of the slave system, if they could be brought to acquiesce but for 1 year or for 1 month in the slavery of our African brother and robbing him of all the rights of humanity and degrading him to a level with the brutes, that then they could imperceptibly be brought to acquiesce in all this for an unlimited duration.
Yep. And so you might be thinking, well, Elizabeth Hyrick, I haven't heard of her, or whatever. It's like, okay, what you said, this isn't, we've said a bunch of things. This isn't just like our position or Elizabeth. This is the thing that we've learned from history. Yep. Like we've learned, there's lessons that we can take from history. And, as Hyrick's saying there, gradualism instead of immediatism, it was when William Wilberforce has the bill to abolish the slave trade. Britain was the leading, practitioner of the transatlantic slave trade. To get Britain out of that, he's putting forward a bill to stop it. How do they keep all these British people from abolishing the slave trade? They put forward a gradual bill of abolition, and they even in that first one that Henry Dundas put forward, they kind of like assigned a date for it off in the future. Well, when that date came, they had been kind of used to it not being abolished, and they didn't do it. And he put forward a bill reminding them of that date. And then they just kind of said, well, we are going to do this, but right now there's a war and there's the French and, so there's always this thing.
Delay breeds delay, compromise breeds compromise.
And by that time, you look at the historians and say, well, a lot of this sort of like fervor kind of gone out of the cause. And so, and it was not until later that they kind of rehabilitated things and got everybody back on board. But the point is that these things that we're saying about abolition today in the fight of abortion in the context of our 50-year American abortion Holocaust are things that we didn't invent. We've learned this. Wilberforce himself kind of learned this in the book that he wrote the year before the bill to abolish the Slave Trade Act was passed. He wrote this, and you will hear in this quote a lot of pieces of the things that we've been arguing. Let me most seriously urge on the conscientious deliberations of those who, by their fatal proposal of gradual instead of immediate abolition, dashed the cup of happiness from the lips of the wretched African, at the very moment when at last he appeared likely to taste it, and who thus proved, in fact, the most efficient supporters of the slave trade. A vast majority in Parliament were then so much alive to the principles of justice and humanity that all direct opposition would have been utterly ineffectual. But this kind of half measure, however unintentionally, exactly answered the purposes of our enemies by giving time for the zeal of men to cool and providing an expedient by which, aided by a little of that self-deception which we are all apt to practice on ourselves on suitable occasions, they might feel the complacencies arising from an act of justice and humanity without paying the price or making the sacrifice which those principles required. Again, this is Wilberforce, Hyrick, all of us saying, you're advocating of gradualism is what's keeping the massive anti-abortion people in this country from advocating abolition.
Yeah, and to quote him most directly, the most efficient supporters of the slave trade were not the slave traders.
Yeah.
The gradualists. The gradualists were the most efficient supporters of the slave trade. That's Wilberforce.
And he's talking about people who claimed to be who said they were against slavery.
Yeah.
Yep.
And by all accounts, believed that they were against slavery.
Yeah, because by the time he wrote this, the majority of Parliament would claim to be opposed to the slave
Right.
trade.
He says all direct opposition to our purposes would never have worked. So if someone had come along, if Henry Dundas came along or someone else came along and said, no abolition, abolition's bad. No, abolition had grown to such a degree where they couldn't stop it. So what did they do? They passed gradual bills in its place instead of it and diluted people. And that's how they kept the slave trade going for year after year after year.
People get mad at us sometimes when we say like Greg Treat is the man most responsible for keeping abortion legal in Oklahoma. He's the pro tem of the Senate for most of the period that we've been doing this and killing abolition bills, but he's a 100% pro-life supported guy. And so people will be like, it's so wrong that you're saying he is the one keeping abortion legal. Why are you fighting him and not the ACLU or Planned Parenthood or the abortion industry? Our answer, the abortion industry doesn't have the power to keep abortion from being abolished in Oklahoma. They don't have the votes. They don't have the population. They do not have the governor's office. The only people who have the power to keep abortion legal are the gradualists, the pro-lifers. And they keep it legal because they're smash-mouth incrementalists and they want to pass another bill next year. So again, what we're saying, we've learned ourselves and we've seen it and seen that it's true. We believe it's biblical, but it's also the things that the Tubmans and the Wilberforces and the Garrisons and the Douglases, they all saw it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we hope Matt Walsh sees it.
We hope he sees it. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just the same type of thing any kind of you would do if you want to avoid any kind of direct action. It's the same type of thing that a lot of very complacent churches have done. They've gone and they've supported crisis pregnancy centers instead of going out and opposing abortion at the murder mills. They do an endless amount of things other than direct action against abortion. Yeah. And that's really what anybody who doesn't want to do the right thing, who doesn't want to, as Wilberforce said, suffer the consequences of that action and take on that sacrifice, would do. It's anything but. And so,
or heaven forbid, they're wanting to do more, and they see the key to continuing to do more in not abolishing it.
Yeah. So, we're calling people to stop being complacent, to grow a spine, and to just do the right thing now, and not delay it anymore.
Generally, kind of a thing that we think Matt Walsh would have them do. Like that's generally his disposition on other issues.
Yeah, Matt Walsh is not a complacent guy. I don't think he's complacent about abortion.
We're not saying he's complacent or that he likes abortion or anything.
But the impact of his position, right, as Heinrich explained, as Wilberforce explained, is to cool the zeal of men, is to keep people from rallying around the call for abolition, which would abolish abortion in state after state after state today.
Yeah. If you got a couple of 1,000 people who like we're wanting to be putting pressure on the legislature and they don't, and they're not supporting the abolition bill, and we're like, why? And they repeat the same exact view that Matt Walsh is repeating, we know why there's not zeal for the abolition bill. And so that's why we have to combat it and talk about it. Now, to that end, we do understand that a lot of this isn't, poor motives or anything, but it's a failure to be educated or understand the arguments. So one of the things that we do at Free the States is try to put those arguments out in our podcast, on our website, in our pamphlets. So we are going, Mr. Matt Walsh, we are going to send you free of charge our nifty Are You an Abolitionist pamphlet, where we, sort of in a, I think, cool, cogent way, lay out what an abolition bill is, what the abolitionist ideological tenets are, and how it all works together. We'll send you that pamphlet if you haven't already seen it. But we would love for you to keep this conversation going. But instead of just sort of like boiling it down to like yours is a position that just no one should deny and ours is an all or nothing stupid position. Really look into our position. We think that if you did, you might find it reasonable and compelling and worth seriously arguing.
And no offense to him at all, but we think just the opposite. We think it's not reasonable to take any other position if you actually know both positions, and if you know what pro-lifers have been doing for a long time, and if you've studied the history of reform, especially in America and England, you would land on a very different conclusion than what the pro-life movement has been doing for a very long time.
And it'd be very helpful
yeah.
if you would steer your considerable audience to support abolition instead of incrementalism.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're not doing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, hopefully you take the time to respond to this. And we'd also like to open up the opportunity for you or we would like to come on your podcast and discuss this. We would be happy to do a debate about this if you're not convinced, or a discussion or whatever you want to call it. We'd have you on here, or we'd happy to go on your podcast as well to actually have a debate about this.
Yeah, we don't want this to turn into sort of like a just hate fest of like straw man after straw man. Like, I think that we could really be reasonable. James and I just did a debate with a couple of pro-lifers who they literally let us actually present our view, and we let them present their view, and they're both there to be like assessed by the viewers of that podcast. And I just think it's come to the point where there are enough abolitionists, it's still a minority position, but there are enough abolitionists out there that it's not going to benefit the pro-lifers to simply say we're mean all or nothingist and not to pay attention. It's like, no, this is gaining ground. These are bills that are out there. You have to make an argument for why you should continue to do what you've been doing for the past 50 years and, not do what we're asking folks to do and abolish abortion.
Yep. So to Matt, hopefully now you can see how anyone could side with something other than the incremental approach.
Yeah, at least see it as a possibility.
Yeah, and continue looking into it. So hope you watch this episode. To all the viewers who are watching this, please share this and tag Matt Walsh, or email it to Matt Walsh, or email it to the Daily Wire, however you can get this to Matt. And Matt, we'd love to
pray that he in his schedule has some time to watch an hour-long program dealing with this and to think deeply about it and read the pamphlet and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So please, guys, get this to Matt. Matt, we would love to have any sort of back and forth. If you want to respond to this on the show, or like Sam said, come on our show, however you want to do it, to talk more about this. Hopefully this opened your eyes a little bit to the abolitionist position. We agree with you that men and women are real things and all sorts of other things. We would be simpatico on many things, but on this, we do believe you're wrong. You did ask to have people challenge you where you're wrong, and you've said that you'd like to deal with them. So please be a man of your word in that regard.
Yep. Alrighty, this has been another episode of the Liberator podcast, where we're committed to being as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. We'll see you next week.